Hello, welcome, and thanks for joining me for this deep dive project insight into the multi-faith building for Exeter University. I'm delighted to be joined by Warwick, our senior building manager, Warwick Roberts, who will give us a bit more insight into the project. So Warwick, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Andrew.
Now, just a bit of background, Warwick. How long have you been with us at Wilmer Dixon?
Just over 5 years now.
Excellent. And how does the multi-faith building compare with all the other projects you worked on at Wilmer Dixon?
It's probably the main difference I had was working at the university was the interaction with the customer. It's a very demanding workplace to work in, basically. So the actual physical build and the supply chain that we've used was all fairly similar. Obviously, like you alluded to, it is Passivhaus, so that was a certainly different element to it that we'll touch on in a second. But yeah, as an overall, probably the main difference was how it was the customer facing side of things, really.
Okay, and just explain for the benefit of our viewers. What actually is the multi-faith project for University of Exeter?
Yeah, so the university basically wanted to bring all of their spaces together where they had spaces for Muslim prayer and all the other types of worship, all into one spot because it was dotted around the university, and it made them one of the only universities in the country with this facility. And certainly I don't think any other universities have got anything to the quality that we've produced. So yeah, quite a unique building. It was single story, and it was basically just circa 400 square meters, so a really, really small building with different spaces for prayer use. Like I say, there was a specialist area for Muslim prayer use, and then they had a small kitchen, a chaplain's office. They also had a changing places facility as well, which they didn't have on the university. So yeah, that was it really.
And obviously from the early stages, they wanted a Passivhaus. How did you plan for it to achieve Passivhaus at an early stage?
To be honest, with Passivhaus, really, it's all in the design. Really, that is done before our time, before we get to site. Really. So yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into the Passivhaus, and it's run by a Passivhaus coordinator. So they basically put all of the calculations of every single element that goes into the building. So the main ones that go in is obviously all of the building fabric, but then it's how the mechanical, electrical kit all works together, really. So yeah, a lot of that's obviously done by the pre-con and the design team. The architect for the project was actually the Passivhaus specialist as well. So he had a real in-depth knowledge. But really, when it gets to production, really what our main point is the airtightness and the record keeping and ensuring that the building is built to the drawings, basically. As far as what materials we're actually using, everything's obviously all spec'd for U values. We need to make sure that we stick to the actual specified materials, and then it's a system of recording that process. You need to have really detailed records because you have to prove everything that's gone into the building. So yeah, as far as the design size, we didn't actually get involved too much.
Did that provide you with a lot of pressure, and how did you make sure you and the team responded and were able to deal with that?
Yeah, so this was my first Passivhaus project. So the first couple of things I did was the Passivhaus training and just learned as much as I possibly could from everybody that had done Passivhaus projects. I talked to a couple of the other teams in Wilmot that have done them. And then, like I say, our architect was the Passivhaus champion for the job. So he had a wealth of knowledge. So my first port of call was to get up to speed as quickly as I could. And in layman's terms, really, like I say, for the project team, really the two things that we had to focus on was really the airtightness and the recording the materials and ensuring the materials that were going into the building were the ones that were spec basically, and having a good and a lot of evidence of how you've done each stage. So the Passivhaus certifier at the end will want to see if you've got an airtight detail around the windows, the build up throughout the stages on a specific window. So you really need to make sure that you know that right at the start, so you're keeping that records all the way through. And then we had some tricky little details as far as air tightness. You basically had to continue a VCL from the roof all the way down into the plaster line. So there was some really tricky details, and really for us it was just making sure that on a daily basis you checked it, and then also we were checking for damage afterwards, because obviously a lot of these details stay exposed.
Yeah, they get exposed.
Exactly, yeah. So you've really got to keep a close eye, because once things get sealed and closed in behind walls, that's when you can have a real issue with air tightness, really. So yeah, that was our primary focus, was really there, ensuring the details were built correctly, they were protected, and our record keeping, and ensuring the materials were the correct ones going into the building.
Is there for colleagues watching this who have a similar type of project, Passivhaus project, because we expect more and more Passivhaus projects to come on market, what would you say would be the biggest learning that you took that you'd pass on?
I would probably say it's just about having that process in place to ensure details don't get done without us seeing them. Any damage is recorded and repaired. That's really it, because obviously there's a million different ways to build Passivhaus. There's not one specific technique. We had all sorts of different detailing, but it's really about getting that process in place on site with the team, and ensuring the supply chain have buy-in as well, that they understand the process of it all and the importance of it. We were quite lucky in the fact that our airline was actually the internal plaster line, which is a pro and a con, but really the good side to that is it's a visual thing. Can you see, is that wall fully plastered top to bottom, and is there no cracks in it? And if that's the case, then you know that your airline is good. In simple terms, obviously there's other details that you need to watch, but if you've got a detail where you're in behind, say if it's concrete frame and you're trying to seal that in behind plasterboard, it's just about having a really robust system in place to make sure things don't get closed up without you knowing about it, because the air tightness levels you've got to achieve is difficult.
And were there any challenges that came along that you didn't foresee, that obviously required you and the team to really work hard to overcome those challenges, and how can we make sure that those challenges are foreseen on future projects?
Yeah, I think just touching on the air tightness again, really, I didn't quite appreciate how much the internal plaster line, how key that was to the air tightness, because we actually had polytherm blocks, which are monolithic build-up of clay blocks, which are supposed to sit together, but they're certainly not air tightness. And I was amazed when we came to do one of our air tests that there was a small chase in one of the walls. When we did the negative pressure, the amount of air that was blowing in was incredible through a tiny little gap. So when you taken down to those levels of air tightness and the air pressures that you're running on the air test, it's amazing how the tiny little gaps make all the difference. When we got to the achieved air tightness level over the building, the air tester was explaining that our overall holes in the wall were equivalent to £2 coins cumulatively. That's incredible over a building that size with the details you've got. So that's the real key. You just got to focus on those details of the air tightness. With obviously the recording and materials and stuff like that, that's fairly basic, and it's something that you should be really looking at anyway. But you just got to focus on what level you're down to with gaps. That is the key. You've really got to. You're looking at stuff that's like tiny, minute, really, and it's amazing, really, how much air can get through that stuff. So that was probably the main thing that we really was a bit of an eye opener. Was what level you have to get to that level.
How do you manage the customer expectations during the process?
In respect to Passivhaus, or
yes, Passivhaus and generally, because obviously the customer will have will probably be applying pressure to make sure that it's done in a timely way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, all projects have that element to it as well. As an overview, taking away Passivhaus, really, like I said, I alluded to previously, was the university a really, really demanding customer, but I felt that it was an advantage at times that they were really close to the project, whereas other projects I've had, you'd see the project manager once, twice a month for a matter of hours. Maybe emails would take a couple of days to respond to. Here at the university, it was like I spoke to the project manager, 5-6 times a day. We met daily. We had a weekly presentation where we gave them a 3-week look ahead. So really, they were really involved in the project. And although that took time out of my day, what it did mean was there was never any surprises. They knew exactly where the project was. Whenever we did air tests, they knew the results straight away. We were really open and honest the whole way through the project. Really, they really lived the project with us on a daily basis, which, like I say, it was challenging at times, but there was definitely benefits to it, as far as even when we came to like the final snagging. The clerk of works comes around daily. There was nothing really outstanding at the end, and the customer knew everything, all of our challenges that we've gone through. It definitely worked. It worked in two ways, and I think on the balance of things, it was actually a good thing to have that level of customer proximity. Yeah.
So it seems that having a customer on hand, one that you can communicate and meet and engage with regularly, is important, particularly with Passivhaus, where you have such exacting requirements, the ability to both move quickly and deal with things and not operate in a vacuum, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, as far as the Passivhaus element went on this project, they were fairly hands-off, although Warm, the certifier for Passivhaus, was customer side. They couldn't really do a lot between the customer and Warm until we had built it and proven the air tightness, really. So they didn't really have that much to do with the Passivhaus side of things during the during the production stage. There wasn't really much for them to actually do or comment on. Obviously, the first big milestone is your first provisional air test, so you can tell them where you're at, really. But it's down to us to make sure the details were being built correctly, really. So yeah, they didn't have a lot to do with that now. And and now it's more after the project is about collating all that information together, probably where the customer has a bit more input with the certifier.
And what, in terms of how you manage quite a specialist supply chain in relation to Passivhaus, are there any sort of lessons and learning you could pass on to colleagues about how you do that successfully?
Well, to be honest, we didn't have any specialist trades in relation to Passivhaus, and you can build Passivhaus out of any system. You don't necessarily need specialist trades to do anything on site. There was certainly nothing that we had that was out of the ordinary. It was more about the detailing and the sequencing. So some things we did do slightly back to front. So, for example, the airline of the walls was top to bottom, not including our screed build-up on the floor. So what we had to do there was basically build all the internal walls, obviously the externals as well, get the roof on, get it watertight. But then at that stage, you would normally put your floor screed in. We didn't. We had to plaster the walls then. So that went from on top of the block and beam, which is the floor build-up. We had a concrete topping. We had to plaster down to the concrete topping, not to the screed. So it was quite a difference in sequencing as how you'd normally do it. We plastered everything, and then we put a floor screed in. So yeah, it was more about sequencing than it was about specialist trades. The only people that you could say were a little bit specialist was our air testers, was a company called BAT, which do a lot of Passivhaus air testing. So we also paid them to do like a bit of a pre-consultation, so they could come in and explain, one, how the air test would work, because it is slightly different when you're getting down to those sort of levels, but also what we needed to be looking out for as far as the build detailing, which we were pretty much on with anyway. So
looking back on the job, are there things or traps that you could fall into, perhaps that experience now has taught you that actually we should do it this way or that way? I'm just wondering about things which you perhaps could have done, which could have been a problem or an issue that perhaps because you didn't do them, they weren't, but things that which we can pass on to our colleagues to make sure that they don't perhaps fall into similar traps when they're looking at big jobs, the Passivhaus jobs and university jobs too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think probably one of the big takeaways for me, but obviously this is more on a design stage of things, was the airline being on the inside plaster line was brilliant because, like I said, it's not hidden. I would have major concerns if it was like, say like I alluded to before, a concrete frame with some sort of air tightness on the inside and then hidden by plasterboard. Certainly on a big project, if you've got, thousands of square feet to monitor, if it's like a VCL or something, it can be easily damaged. I really would have a lot of concerns on, is every section of that checked? And it's so easy if a dry liner's coming along, if he just rips a bit but he's putting a board up, not to mention it. That's where I think a lot of those problems would be solved in design. And certainly, like I say, with us having a plaster line, it's there in front of you. The only bits of the plaster that got hidden were the bits that were below the screed. I think probably the lessons learned would be the techniques and the methods that need to be obviously at the design stage, depending on the scale of the project, really, and the complexity. I would suggest in general, the actual build process went well, and we did well on our first air test. So in general, it was all. I think it went fairly well on site as far as we built it. But I think we had a fairly simple Passivhaus build because it was a concrete floor, concrete. Or parafoam walls and then a timber roof, so we almost just made a square box essentially. And the airtight line was a line in a red line just drawn around the complete inside of the building. But where it get complex is detailing if it was a more complex building with step levels and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it really is it's all focused in the design stage and getting feedback from good Passivhaus design to make sure that that's fed in early stages, really, because once you get to site, you've just got to build it how it's designed at the end of the day. Certainly with Passivhaus, you can't change the details. Once it's designed, all those calculations have gone into the Passivhaus calculator at the end of the day. It'll be too late then. So I think to me that would be the main focus. So
really the design stage is critical, and I know that we're introducing dialects, aren't we, across the business progressively over this year, and that's obviously there to help collaboration at the pre-construction stage and the different parties and bring it all together visually to help that process. And it sounds like when it comes to Passivhaus in particular, getting it right at that design stage at pre-construction is fundamental in terms of how we achieve predictable outcomes at the end of the project.
That's the key, definitely.
If you look at this project, what would you say were the things that you were most proud about, you and the team?
To be honest, achieving the air tightness, because we've got 0.5, so that's a real achievement. Like I say, with some tricky details, that was a real achievement, which I was really pleased with. And also the finish of the building. We managed to get it to a really, really good standard, which I was really pleased with. And also there was a lot of different techniques that I've never built with before. So I mentioned before, we obviously had the parafoam blocks. Nobody that in the southwest from Wilmot had built with these. Our supply chain had never built with these. So we actually went and had a couple of look at some other sites that were building with those blocks. The building was clad with a ceramic tile as well. So that was really unusual and quite difficult when you've got a material that's got no tolerance for variation being mounted on a clay block, which has got up to 10, 15 mil. So to get the finish on the outside of the building was actually quite tricky to get it to look like it did. So just generally the overall finish of the building, although it was a really small one, there was a lot of detailing, and it really turned out like a nice looking building.
I think interesting enough, I know you say it's a small building and value-wise it's probably also relatively small in comparison to some of the big projects we're doing, but it's very easy sometimes with small projects to maybe be a little bit, take your eye off the ball, to sort of think, well, actually it's a smaller project, we don't have to worry, almost like to be complacent. Did you make sure on this job that you weren't complacent?
Oh, definitely. It's something that I do think we definitely fall into a trap, because this was it ended up around the 5 mark, but it was 4.5 to start with, and I think what we fell into the trap our side from the bid team was that we put a small team on it, but with Wilmot's, our quality procedures, it being Passivhaus, being at the university, the team was really stretched in what we needed. We could have really done with an extra body down on the project, really. So that's a lesson that our LCO does need to take forward, and it's certainly something that our directors made a note of. Certainly at the university as well, you almost need a person just to manage the university. So that's something definitely to take forward. I don't think, as far as a production site team, we ever look at the value and think, oh well, this is going to be easy. We just take the job for face value at the end of the day, and we build it and attack it how we would do any other project. But certainly from a pre-con and bid team, we do tend to do that in this region, and have the teams that can be on the small side. I think that's good to know. And looking as we enter the sort of the last 5 or so minutes, because I want this to be very much a deep dive, but also quite a short dive, because I appreciate everyone's busy, and this is just very much about making sure that we mark, remember, and capture the learning that you've and the team have generated. As we enter the last 5 or so minutes of our webinar, what would you say to someone or any of our teams who have similar projects for a university on a live site that have exacting demands like Passivhaus? How would you reassure them that actually these are the steps that we need to take to make sure that that it's successful, and we deliver the predictable outcomes that we and our customers seek to achieve? Yeah, definitely. Well, obviously, I've touched on the Passivhaus side of things, which is all about recording the evidence as it goes in. Don't let stuff get built and not recorded, because that can cause a real problem in the future. Also, products that go into the building don't necessarily have to be a certified Passivhaus certified element, so like the windows and doors. But what you may find is that down the line, it's actually really hard to get the information out of, like I say, probably focusing mainly on windows and doors. You could put a window and door in that will do the same U value, but if they can't get the certification they need, the project won't become Passivhaus. So that's really key for people to know up front who we're buying elements of kit from. Same with like the MVHRs and stuff. Some of them can be Passivhaus rated, some of them not. And if you go for a not option, they're normally cheaper. But then again, you might find at the end of the project that you're struggling to get the information through. Definitely a key element of the whole process is ensuring that the Passivhaus certifier has fully reviewed all the MEP in the building as well, because you normally will then get a supply chain on board who will start purchasing, and sometimes they'll pick their own kit that they want to use. It's ensuring that process is thorough, and that the Passivhaus certifier has reviewed everything that the MEP guys are going to purchase, because we did have that as well, where we actually were like, everything you're going to order is going to be at risk, because we haven't had a thorough review yet on the certifier side, and you can't really push the certifiers because they're all super busy, and their customer side, they need a set amount of time, which I think was about 12 to 16 weeks to really review information. So that process there of getting all that information to them, giving them the time to review, is probably one that we weren't aware of. Luckily it didn't catch us out, but potentially could have done. So that's the big one. And recording everything, because obviously you can't go back, you don't want to be going back and cutting holes and getting photographs. So really keeping that, and and just keeping a real focus on the air details. That's absolutely key, because like I say, it's amazing how much air can escape when you're down at those low pressures from really small holes. So they'd be my key takeaways from the project.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I understand you're now working on the Corbin Head Hotel down in Torquay.
That's it. Yep. So we're just building, I think it's a 159 room hotel just down on the front. So I've only come down to help finish it out. We've got another 4 or 5 months, something along those lines, to get it over the line. But yeah,
it's a part of a lot of work we're doing down in Torquay. I know that our development solutions business are looking at some opportunities down there too, and just generally we seem to be doing a lot of good stuff. And I know that the hotel itself will be a big addition to the town, and it's right on the seafront, so you'll see it. Everyone sees it when they turn up and they drive into town. Yeah,
definitely. It's going to be quite an impressive building internally wise, as well as quite a nice finish. So yeah, it's good, interesting for me. I've not done a hotel, so interesting to be on this one.
Well, again, thank you very much, Warwick. I appreciate your time, and thank you. And hopefully everyone watching will be able to join me for my next Project Insight coming soon. So thank you.
Thank you.